Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Mary Laplante. I'm Vice President of Client Services for Digital Clarity Group. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our January Get Clarity webinar. We sincerely appreciate your taking the time from your busy schedule to join us. Today we take a clear-eyed look at the role of the service providers in building world-class solutions for managing the experience that we deliver to our customers and prospects. A few housekeeping notes before we start. This webinar is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a link to the replay in case you wish to share with your colleagues or want to listen instead of taking notes. We'll answer questions at the end, but you don't need to wait until the end to submit them. You can enter them in the question window in the lower right of the GoToWebinar console at any time throughout the session. Every organization delivers an experience. We book travel. We buy the latest running shoes on Zappos.com. We change our healthcare benefits using our intranets. We do our taxes online. Experience happens. We remember the bad, we note the good, and we mostly forget the mediocre experience that describes the vast majority of our interactions as consumers, business professionals, employees, and citizens. Experience happens, whether we manage it or not. More and more global companies are realizing that they need to proactively manage the experience so that it doesn't just happen. The risks of not doing so are too great in today's environment of hyper-engagement. It's becoming do experience management or die by ceding competitive advantage, by becoming irrelevant, by not delivering value in every transaction, every channel 24/7. So the question really becomes, how do we do the do? Forward-thinking companies are recognizing the need for vision, strategies, and tactics for managing experience. And those committed to building world-class experience management are taking action today. As analysts and consultants, we work daily with organizations who are leveraging digital technologies, content, and practices to proactively, consciously manage experience and ensure that it's aligned with strategic goals and objectives. Managing rich media assets, facilitating e-commerce, enabling better cross-functional collaboration, all are becoming critically important. But it is a fact, however, that there is no off-the-shelf, in-a-box, configure-it-for-me software solution for customer experience management, or CEM. Solutions are unique to the organizations deploying them, and today they have to be designed, built, integrated, and maintained. Keeping pace with user expectations means that those custom solutions are increasing in complexity, scope, and organizational footprint. So if you're going to do experience management, the question then becomes, who is going to do the real work? In response to the pressures of time, market, and functionality, more and more organizations are turning to qualified service partners for help. What types of firms provide the necessary skills and experience? Who has the requisite chops in key technologies like web content management, marketing automation, and e-commerce? What vertical industry know-how do they have? What are the criteria that matter when choosing a service partner? In 2013, Digital Clarity Group set out to answer these and related questions with original primary research. We published the results of that work in the Guide to Service Providers for Web Content and Customer Experience Management. The North American version was released in August 2013, and the edition covering service firms in Europe, UK, and Scandinavia will be published in April. In today's webinar, we'll share the highlights of the extensive research that underpins these reports. We'll look at the landscape of providers. We'll discuss the key findings as they relate to provider-client relationships, organizational readiness, and scope of vision. And we'll discuss the implications. What does all of this mean? If you're an enterprise adopter of experience management, you'll have a starting point for carefully considering your options for service providers, as this decision is likely to be more impactful in the long run than the technology you acquire. If you're a service provider, you'll gain insight into how to position your skills and expertise to attract new clients and deliver the services that ultimately result in value for your clients. Leading our walkthrough the research today is Jill Gibson, and I've been going on and on here for a few minutes, so Jill, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mary. Well, Yes, I'm Jill Finger-Gibson. I'm a principal analyst at Digital Clarity Group. I joined the company, for those of you who are online and aren't familiar with me, I joined in August 2013. And in addition to being the director for the study guides to service providers in more particularly right now for Europe, I also wear the hat of directing knowledge and product development at DCG. So one of my roles is to work on bringing more products such as this report to the market. And as far as my experience goes, I have about 15 years of experience designing these types of information services, and I've worked in both in-house within companies as an analyst, as a data analyst and product management analyst, as well as an industry analyst at IDC and Outsell.
Great, thanks, Jill. For those of you who may not be familiar with Digital Clarity Group, we are a research-based advisory firm focused on the technologies and practices that drive experience management in the digital age. Our clients are enterprise adopters, technology suppliers, and service providers who build and deploy solutions for experience management. We conduct and publish research, offer consulting services, and are recognized thought leaders in the markets that we cover. Before Jill describes the research and findings, we thought we'd start by putting today's discussion in a business context. So how should you be thinking about the services component of your CEM solutions? First and foremost, it's really important to recognize that it's not a matter of if you need services, it's who is going to provide these services. As we said earlier, there's really no such thing as a software solution for CEM, or Customer Experience Management. The solution for your company is custom and requires design, development, and deployment support. So on this slide, here's our customer experience champion, and he's asking himself questions that probably resonate with all the enterprise folks in our audience today. He knows his company needs services, and he's asking himself, gosh, can we do this ourselves? Can it be done internally? Are the right skills and expertise available within our organization? How much and what kind of help can our technology vendors provide? What does it mean to bring in our own strategic services partner? Jill, you've talked to companies who have worked with services firms as part of our research for the reports. What do you think? Are companies becoming more aware of the reality of not if but who?
I think so. I think we're starting to hear more and more of that, and just a note that we've done both the North America research we've done, and more recently we've talked to the European providers, but it's both been over the last year, and we're hearing more and more that organizations are becoming more aware of this, that, you know, it started with particularly the retail sector. You know, the downturn affected that sector, one of the worst. And that's where it initially started. But if you look at the service providers we talked to, it's really all across the board in different industries, manufacturing. We're even seeing these types of questions come up not just in commercial ventures, but also for charities and governments and educational institutions who are, you know, you substitute the word customer for student or constituent. These are all, it's a common thing that we're definitely hearing is becoming more prevalent.
Right. So everybody's aiming for a better experience, and the goal here is to avoid, we'll talk about this throughout the webinar, but the goal here is kind of to avoid service provider afterthought syndrome, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Right. So let's take a look at the options that you have if you're thinking of working with a services provider. Jill, maybe you could start here with a little bit of background on our methodology first.
Sure. So we went through an extensive primary research process in order to determine what service providers we would speak to. After we gathered recommendations from various vendors in the field and also from folks who know the open source world as well, we gathered a list of about 150 different service providers and sent them online surveys for factual information about their companies. And those that replied back, we set up follow-up, more extensive one-hour interviews with them to talk more broadly about their business, what processes they have in place for how they see projects, and sort of more broadly how they see themselves in the markets. And we followed up those calls with calls to their clients, so the service provider's customers, as a reference, just to provide a check that what we were hearing was consistent with what their clients were actually doing. And so the result is we've spoken to, between North America and Europe in the last year, we've spoke to about 85 different service providers that are kind of in a range of different types. I mean, we break out the service provider, the CEM service provider landscape into 4 categories of, you see the 4 boxes: digital interactive agencies, advertising agencies, systems integrators, and marketing comms agencies. And we found consistently through both North America and Europe that most respondents that we were talking to identified either as the digital interactive agencies or systems integrators, or a combination of the two. They see themselves moving into a world where they need both. And this means that we see a bit of the landscape changing. There's more companies identifying themselves as full service rather than specializing in a specific area.
And I think that last point really sort of surfaces the need to really do homework when you're looking at choosing a partner, as the landscape shifts here and positioning changes a little bit.
Right.
So what are the headlines coming out of the research? Let's talk about that.
Okay. Well, first, before I go into the general headlines of the research, I just want to make a point about why we are doing this these studies and what was behind the questions that we asked and whom we interviewed. We believe at DCG that people get technology now. I mean, with the projects that companies and enterprises and organizations are coming up against, the technology can be difficult, but it's not the key pain point when you look at customer experience. When you look at customer experience, you're really looking at how to evaluate a service provider partner. And when you're doing that, each one starts from a different point. They're all unique in some way. And how do you choose those service providers, knowing that, you can look at their website, you can listen to their pitches, but what we're trying to really uncover is, what's behind that? How will you be able to determine that regardless of the team that's assigned to you from a specific service provider, that you'll get a consistent and high quality set of processes, knowledge sharing, people who have been well trained, who are consistent? How do you avoid the situation of where you sit in a pitch and you have all the senior partners who are giving you a great pitch, and then after that A team is in there, the folks who are actually executing are a C team of much less experienced juniors who maybe can't deliver on the initial promise. Mm-hmm. Well, our questions aim to get under the hood of this stuff and to see what goes into a successful service provider. And the first findings that we found were that relationships between businesses and their partners are really undergoing a rapid transformation. The first is, we heard this, I would say almost universally, that agile project management is becoming more of the norm. This sort of iterative, based on learning, fail fast projects that involve with teams that are composed both on the client side and the service provider side are becoming more common. And one provider said in an interview, we do some projects in waterfall, but less and less, and most in agile and scrum. And another service provider pointed out that with these types of projects, it's just important for the service provider to find out from the client what the client doesn't want as much as what they want. And often that doesn't surface right away when you're trying to define requirements. It's a gradual process. The second thing that we're finding is that more companies are starting to see and aim at, more service providers are aiming at not being so project-based, but being more partnership-based. This is something that's it's long been quite common among larger companies. Large companies choose an agency of record, for example, to handle all of their business for a certain line of business. But we're even seeing this happen with smaller companies with as little as 10 people who are getting into relationships that are more on a retainer basis than project basis. And we heard from several, particularly of these smaller companies, that they have pretty big global brands that they've been starting to serve. You know, that their being small is no longer seen as a too huge a risk for a larger company. And in fact, some of the smaller companies are starting, you know, reported they've taken over projects from much larger global companies that had previously not succeeded in meeting the objectives. So the partnerships, not projects thing is happening across the board. The third thing is, you know, it's really becoming much more driven by the very top of the organization, by the C-suite. A lot of companies are meeting with, you know, that some have the CMO or a combination of the CMO or the CIO. In some cases, they're meeting with the CEO. One point that did come out in several interviews was that they were seeing less IT and more folks who are in the sort of marketing and strategy role. And again, it's been company sizes across the board that are seeing this. Previously, it used to be the lines of business that were driving this, and now it's the more top-line strategic focus.
You know, when you were talking about companies, service providers of all sizes, and size not necessarily being a key decision factor for a relationship, it reminded me of that old cartoon about the dog sitting behind the computer saying, you know, on the internet nobody knows you're a dog. So it's interesting to hear then that some of that size doesn't matter, that it's skills, expertise, it's the ability to talk in partnership lingo instead of project lingo. And so this means probably that some of the mid-size, the service providers, they're sometimes charged to punch above their weight, so to speak, when looking at market opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. And we're hearing a lot more that there isn't necessarily a large company wants to have a large service provider anymore. Yeah. There's more of the risk, ability to, you know, desire to take the risk in order to see if they could get what they want by a smaller company. Yeah. And technology has driven a lot of that. You know, the move towards more cloud-based virtual types of situations, the fact that, you know, even small companies can afford to get quite large bandwidth and produce video. You know, that's a lot of that is technology driven, but it's not necessarily the reason anymore.
Yeah, that's a great point about the impact of cloud on all of this too.
Yep.
Ready to go on?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So another thing that we're finding, and you know, in line with what we said that what we were just talking about, that the technical, you know, a lot of this is driven by technology, but really the challenges that we're hearing are coming up are more organizational than technological. We really didn't talk to too many service providers that said, yeah, I'm really struggling with doing X because the technology isn't there yet, or because this vendor doesn't deliver, or that what didn't come up. Instead, folks are more concerned for one, and this came out particularly in Europe, about a perceived skills shortage for both technical talent, you know, developers of all levels, and also the more creative talent and strategy folks. And in Europe, one of the ways that companies are answering that is more and more turning to nearshoring, where they're looking at they're opening offices in less expensive Eastern European countries where they have the technical skills and the talent, but the salaries are not as high, and that's one way. In North America, we particularly heard that there's a desire for more marketing technologists, a sort of mythical unicorn person who can mix together the, you know, have the marketing hat, but also really understand the technology and what's part of technology selection, and put those two things together. And then also we're without initially intending to, service providers are finding as they move forward with clients in this more iterative, agile way, that clients are starting to ask them to help with organizational issues, their internal organizational issues. And one service provider said they were looking at helping the client at changing job roles and reporting titles and changing their actual team structure, which I thought was really interesting because that's not really what they're in the business for, but they're ending up being pulled in that direction, that this is something that's more traditionally thought of as a change management consulting, traditional consulting firm role, that some of the service providers are actually being drawn into. And another thing is that some service providers are saying they're starting to see folks with C-level titles for customer experience, who have the strategic mandate directly from the CEO or the managing director to improve the customer experience overall. Customer experience officer, chief customer officer, folks that are bringing together both the physical and the digital worlds into one.
One of the things that one of the findings that I really find interesting is the restructuring, the help with restructuring, and it reflects back on a recognition that once an organization decides to really shine a spotlight on delivering and proactively managing customer experience, there's this recognition that, wait a minute, I need to rethink the way I'm organized, the way our company functions. So, the impact of having a customer experience, an experience management strategy and tactics, and the extent to which that really impacts the whole organization really surfaces for me in that particular observation from the research.
Yeah, I kind of think about it as I've got a blog post coming out on a similar topic actually, where it's kind of like when you do a sort of do-it-yourself project on your house and you paint a room, and then once you've painted the room this different color or brighter shade or whatever, you realize, oh my God, the sofa doesn't fit. Or, there's once you start to make some changes that feel small at the end, you end up sometimes having to change the entire picture to make it all work. I think it's kind of similar with the way that it's working with CEM.
Right, and that includes breaking down walls too. One of the things in my own experience working with our clients and in my other past lives, the lack of cross-functional collaboration is often a company's biggest enemy when it comes to managing experience, because companies just don't have infrastructures that allow that cross-functional collaboration that becomes essential.
Yeah, for sure.
So then,
and it's a question. Sorry, go ahead.
It's just not the color of the walls; it's where the walls are.
Right. Right, and making sure you can get from one room to the other, that there's a door between the two, because that's one thing that I can't remember offhand who said this in a presentation a few months ago, but that silos can be okay as long as they're connected. Silos are they're good for innovation. You can't make everybody work with everybody, but you need to make sure that they can communicate with each other. So yeah, for sure.
All right.
Okay, so the next set of findings I wanted to focus on is we are hearing from service providers that the vision of customers by their clients is becoming much more holistic. I heard many times over service providers saying, "Oh, our RFPs are becoming much more savvy, more specific. They're not just about wanting a WCM solution. They're not just talking about wanting a commerce solution. They're more talking about either they're using the term customer experience. They want omni-channel customer journeys. A complete view of the customer. This is becoming more common, even if they don't necessarily know what that means. There's a recognition that that's something that needs to happen more than these isolated types of projects as it was a few years ago. Another thing I heard quite often was mobile first is becoming more than, oh yeah, and by the way, we also want mobile as part of our project. This is particularly true, I think it's come out a lot within Europe, and some of the service providers that operate in Europe, they're hearing, some said they were particularly hearing it from the Nordics and the Baltic regions. So that's becoming part of this whole holistic view. Another part of the holistic view that's rising to the fore is that e-commerce is becoming integral to businesses, you know, even beyond travel and retail and those that where you traditionally think of commerce and e-commerce being central. You know, one service provider said that customers who traditionally talked about WCM now have to have a commerce solution, whether they are a direct seller or not. Mm-hmm. So again, it's an issue of people aren't just talking about the technologies and how do they integrate the technologies. They're talking about services and experiences and how they can deliver them.
On that last point, do you, I mean, in my mind, it means broader transaction management, not just e-commerce. Do you think you know, the way we talk about this in the marketplace, do you think it'll broaden to that transaction management term instead of e-commerce, or is it still early to predict whether that will happen?
I think that I think it's going to stay e-commerce for a while because, and this is something that you know, to point out one thing that we probably didn't hear, and this is a problem, and is that we're not hearing much of a connection between the analog and the digital world, the transactions, if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, okay.
You know, there's still a lot of focus on that this is digital, or referred to as digital marketing, rather than, you know, there's a focus on when you look at the customer at every point that a company touches or an organization touches, there's all these analog equivalents, the delivery driver who delivers your package, the person who comes into your house to fix your thermostat, the call center person that you talk to when you're having a problem with your credit card. We still haven't really heard too much about how service providers are recognizing that and reconciling the digital with the analog world. And I think it's going to be a little more time before some really start bringing that up. But that's important. That's, you know, for real customer experience management, you know, that's something that we definitely see has to happen. Is the next step.
Yeah, I mean, we, as analysts, you know, our job is to be thinking 2 years beyond the market. That's kind of what we do. And we see digital marketing becoming the term digital marketing being very specific to a set of activities, when in fact, over time, even now in some companies, that's just morphing to experience management, to that broader perspective. So it's not digital marketing or experience management, it's digital marketing as one component of experience management.
Right, for sure.
Great. Well, thanks. That's a great overview of the findings, but of course now everybody has questions, so let's talk about implications. What's the so what in all of this for folks on the call today?
Well, there's you know, we know there's a range of folks on the call, so let's look at it for different types of folks. If you're a buyer, if you're a company looking to improve the customer experience, you really need to look for consistency in your service provider. In how do they approach projects? Do they have a project management methodology? How do they train new staff? How do they make sure that existing staff are kept up to date? How do they make sure that their people are communicating effectively with each other? The other thing is that, you know, we heard again that a project, for buyers to keep aware, a project has more chance of a success if it has support from the very top of an organization. That really, you know, we like to think sometimes even in more modern companies that it's more holistic and, you know, it's a flat, the flat organization, but really we heard again, unless the CEO or equivalent is on board and supports this, it's really an uphill battle to try to bring about this kind of change. A few service providers even use the term it's not a grassroots effort. It needs the support from the top.
So the trend that more companies are implementing C-level titles, this is all headed in the right direction, but it's still that's still a big piece, getting that business case sold up in the organization then.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. What about for service providers who are in our audience today?
Okay. Well, service providers, you know, the ones that we heard that were experiencing the largest growth and having the most success over the last year or two said they've really had to invest in a couple of different areas, in client education, of what, you know, customer experience management, particularly in Europe, isn't as well known a term. So they need to explain what that is, how to work in an agile framework, because that's, and if you're not in the software world, that's kind of a very new and different way of working. And also, one large service provider said, you know, it's really important to be able to explain what you don't do. You can't do everything. And this is something that the more companies that kind of all say, oh yeah, we're a full service provider, we can do the digital and we can do the technical. I heard a lot of companies saying that, but I think you need to be able to say what, you can't be strong at everything, nobody will believe you, and you can't be, you know, you can't say that you're a global provider and serve all your regions when your Latin American presence consists of one office in Brazil. And it's not even a full service office. So, you know, explaining what you don't do, be transparent about that. That's really important for the service providers. And that comes into play with what we were talking about earlier about becoming more of a partnership with the company. There has to be, you have to allow for a level of trust to build up with your client. You don't want to just do one project in 6 months and then leave. You want it to lead to a series of engagements. And then for the vendors, for technology vendors, you know, one thing that we heard is that a lot of service providers work, you know, they work with vendors. The vendors are their active partners. I heard a few cases where folks said, you know, the vendors are way ahead of where the market is. They don't necessarily understand where the market is actually at, and that means it makes it harder for them, for the service provider message to resonate in turn with their customers. I think, you know, for vendors, if you're a vendor, you really need to make sure that your vision and your language resonate with your prospective partners, and that, you know, you have to have some sort of a vision and a view for how the world is developing, but don't get too ahead of the game. You need to use real use cases as examples. Another interesting thing I heard is that, particularly, you know, we were asking about the term customer experience management and familiarity, and a few of our German interviewees said, well, really, that English term, when you translate it literally into German, makes no sense, and we never use it. So again, it's not just understanding the language literally, as well as, you know, what the way that customers are thinking. That's right. An important thing to think about.
Yeah. All right. We're going to take, I just want to take a brief break here and remind our audience that we will take some questions. If you have one you want to throw over to Jill, please use the question box on your GoToWebinar console on the right-hand side, and we'll take some of those. Let's see. Here's a quick slide to tell you how to get some more information about what we've covered today. We will send you a free sample of the Guide to Service Providers for Web Content and Customer Experience Management, the North American version, along with a link to the replay to today's webinar. There's more information about the guide on our website. If you want to contact Jill directly with any questions about the research she's presented this morning, there's her email address. My email address is here if you have interest in understanding more about our thought leadership programs for service providers. And if you are interested in our technology and service provider selections, if you're an enterprise adopter looking for some help, you can contact Mike Marchanda, whose email address is on the slide. He hasn't spoken, but he's been in the background doing the recording this morning. So Jill, before we turn to our list of questions, I thought maybe I just had one question that's been at the back of my mind here. You know, based on the research, you know, there's always this current question of the chicken and the egg in the industry right now. Which comes first? Do we buy the technology? Do we do our own in-house homework, identify the center of gravity for our CEM solution, for example? Oh, we want to re-platform our content management system, for example. Or do we engage the service partner first? I think that's going to evolve over time, but what do you think the current snapshot is?
I think more and more, and we heard this from the service providers, are saying they're looking more at overall strategy, and they're not necessarily considering this as a starting with the technology decision. I think, and that comes back to that, the CEOs or equivalent are starting to look more at what this means to address their customers. And, sometimes it's coming from, we have one instance where it's not necessarily a customer experience driven issue with this particular CEO, but it's that there's also a move to consolidate suppliers. We're hearing a lot of some global companies saying, they're really not even just necessarily for cost savings, but for simplification. And so I think that might be inadvertently driving the trend towards engaging the service partner first, in addition to it being on, more strategic, a part of the C-level rather than the line of business.
Right, right. It's interesting that you mentioned sort of that issue. I was actually talking with a technology vendor who serves the higher education market this morning. Mm-hmm. And the issue of, in a large educational institution, you have a lot of silos, and everybody sort of manages their own web presence, their own website. But now there's a desire to have more branding associated with the experience, and so trying to put some umbrella experience across the smaller silos, the buckets of experience. I think that's the first time I've heard that trend in higher ed, but I think it speaks to the same thing you're talking about. There's not only supplier consolidation, but there's a desire for consistent branding too.
Right, for sure. Yeah. And it gets much more complicated in this context. I mean, if you go back to the digital framework that companies are working on, if you have websites in 100 countries, you need to make sure that the message is somewhat consistent. Even if you're doing it in different languages, you have and even different languages, sometimes the context needs to be different for countries that speak the same language. So, but there does need to be that underlying consistency.
Right. Right. In a previous life, I actually covered content globalization and localization as an analyst. And this need, in my mind, the most fundamental requirement for experience management is speaking in the language of your customer.
Yeah.
And so often that expertise in the language issues that are fundamental just also gets lost in the discussion, sort of.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we do have one question, and this question was actually it was submitted as by somebody who registered for the webinar, and I think you've addressed this throughout the conversation. But let me just play it back so that we sort of get an answer that pulls some things together. Okay. This person wrote, "We're undergoing sort of a major initiative. We're going to combine. We're looking for ad buying, customer relationship management, web content management. This will combine many commercial off-the-shelf solutions like Salesforce.com. What approach would you recommend for their integration?"
Right.
Let's give the analyst answer. It depends.
It depends. No, I don't think it depends. I think it's actually, you need to kind of think about reframing the question. Why do you want to integrate them? What's the reason that you're thinking about technology integration? What's the goal? Because I think that's something that you engage a service provider, a really good one, they'll want to say, well, let's take a step back and look at let's figure out who your customers are, what sort of use cases you have, what are their personas, what's the customer journey, and that goes beyond the technology. It's more of, before you start talking about integrating the technologies, you need to figure out what you're trying to do, once they are integrated, how is that going to improve your business? And also, what are the integrations going to create? Do you think that actually it will create an ability to convert directly to more sales? Because let's be honest, that's where, unless you're talking about higher ed, of course, or government, you're leading to ultimately to increased revenue. But when you start out thinking about like how do we integrate the technologies, you don't necessarily get to how are we going to meet our goals. I think there's that interim step that you need to take to say, okay, first, we've got all these different bits and pieces. What are we trying to achieve more broadly with our customers? And then from there, figure out where the technology piece fits, probably with a service provider of some sort.
Right. Well, I think it's almost always the case that when I know that when DCG does a user engagement, we always try to talk to the highest level business owner that we can reach, simply because, as you just said, we want to make sure that any investment, whether it's in a services firm or a technology or a new practice development, it's got to be aligned with the business goals and objectives of the business.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just an exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so, and that might be why we are hearing from our interviews, it came out a lot more that if it comes from the IT side of the business, unfortunately the IT folks come with a specific technology question rather than here's the underwriting business question that
Right.
I'm trying to solve here, and that
Yeah.
that might be why we're seeing a trend of these kinds of decisions no longer being in the hands of the CIO or the CTO, and more in, shifting to marketing and strategy.
I think that's that's a good summary that says essentially you really have to make sure that the chairs at the stakeholder table are really populated with all the right people, a diverse group.
Yep, for sure.
Great. Well, I've just checked our question queue, and let me see here what we've got. Well, we don't really have anything coming in today. Somebody was kind enough to say thanks, but they have to leave early. So maybe we'll just sort of wrap up early ourselves here. Thanks everybody for attending. The replay will be available soon. Visit our website to download our thought leadership papers. The new European version of the guide will be released in a couple of months in early April, which will soon be upon us. Thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.
And thank you.